Tonight, we step softly into the heavy air of 19th century England. The year is somewhere in the middle of Queen Victoria's long reign. The streets are narrow, the houses crowded close together, and the air thick. Not just with fog, not just with coal smoke, but with something far more intimate: human life, unfiltered. If you could stand in a London street in 1850 and simply breathe in, slowly, you would notice layers. Horse manure warming in the morning sun, coal soot settling like invisible dust, wet wool steaming gently from coats and skirts. And beneath it all, a faint, persistent human musk. Not shocking, not scandalous, simply constant. This was not a world of daily showers, scented detergents, or antibacterial soap. Cleanliness meant something very different. It was about visible dirt, not invisible bacteria. Germ theory had not yet transformed public health. The idea that microscopic organisms cause disease would only become widely accepted later in the century. Until then, people believed in miasma, bad air. Illness floated in foul smells, they thought, rather than lived on skin. Ironically, this belief led to even more perfume, and sometimes even less washing. To understand why Victorian women often smelled strong, we must begin with water. There was no hot tap waiting obediently in a tiled bathroom. Most homes had no plumbing at all. Water had to be carried, bucket by bucket, from a pump, a well, or a communal source. Then it had to be heated over a fire. Heating enough water for a full bath could take hours and great effort. For poor families living in crowded tenements, even this was a luxury. A single cold water pump in the courtyard might serve dozens of households. Privacy was limited. Time was scarce. Fuel cost money. Bathing became less about comfort and more about calculation. The answer depends entirely on class. Working class women might wash fully perhaps once every few weeks, sometimes less. They would perform what was known as a strip wash, or top and tail. That meant washing the face, neck, hands, and underarms with a damp cloth and a small basin of water. Areas that showed in public were prioritized. The rest? Often left alone unless absolutely necessary. Middle-class women typically bathed once a week, sometimes every 2 weeks. A full immersion bath was considered quite indulgent. Sponge baths in the bedroom were more common. Upper-class women had more access to servants and heated water. Weekly bathing was respectable, and some even bathed twice a week by the late Victorian period. But daily bathing? Rare, and even considered unhealthy by some. Too much washing, it was believed, could weaken the constitution and open the pores to illness. A bath was not a simple soak. A metal or wooden tub would be placed near the kitchen fire. Buckets of hot water were carried and poured in. Cold water was added to adjust the temperature. Privacy depended on who was home and whether doors locked. Soap was harsh, often made from animal fat and lye. It could dry the skin and leave a faint, almost sour scent. Fine perfumed soaps existed, but were expensive. After washing, water was reused. In many households, multiple family members bathed in the same tub. The eldest or most important went first. The youngest often bathed last. By then, the water might be cloudy and lukewarm. Drying meant coarse towels, no fluffy cotton luxury, just rough fabric and brisk rubbing. Now, gently, without drama, we address the part rarely spoken of. Indoor flush toilets became more common only toward the end of the Victorian era. Before that, chamber pots were standard. They were kept under beds or in small closets. Waste was emptied into cesspits or thrown into the street, sometimes with warning, sometimes without. Toilet paper as we know it did not widely exist. Instead, people used scraps of cloth, washed and reused, newspaper, old letters, rags. In poorer homes, even leaves or straw. Bidets were uncommon in England. Washing after toileting was not routine. Some women might use a damp cloth during their morning wash, but this was not universal. As you might imagine, under heavy layers of clothing in warm weather, odor could linger. Victorian women wore multiple layers: a chemise, the underlayer, corset, petticoats, often several, outer dress, stockings, boots. Many of these were made from wool, thick, insulating, and not frequently washed. Outer garments were rarely laundered because washing could ruin shape and fabric. The chemise absorbed sweat and oils from the body. It might be washed weekly if water and time allowed, but between washes, it simply aired out near a window or fire. Wool absorbs and holds scent. Heat builds beneath layers. Movement compresses fabric. By midday, especially in summer, the trapped moisture produced a strong, sour human odor. Not shocking by their standards, but noticeable to a modern nose. They did not ignore it. They managed it. Perfume was essential. Rosewater, lavender water, violet oil, dabbed on wrists, neck, and handkerchiefs. Some women pinned sachets of dried herbs inside their bodices. Lavender bags were tucked into drawers and corsets. Powders made from rice flour or starch were dusted under arms and on the chest to absorb moisture. Vinegar washes were popular. A diluted vinegar sponge down was believed to purify and deodorize. It left skin faintly sharp-smelling, but it masked stronger notes. Herbal posies, called nosegays, were carried in public. A small bouquet of rosemary, thyme, or violets held discreetly to the nose during unpleasant moments. The differences were stark. Poor women often worked in factories, laundries, markets. Physical labor meant sweat. Limited access to clean water meant infrequent full bathing. Shared beds and crowded housing amplified smell. Coal smoke settled into fabric. Food odors, onions, fish, cabbage, clung to clothing. They masked what they could with cheap scented waters or simply endured. When everyone smells similar, it becomes normal. Wealthy women had advantages: servants to haul water, larger homes with ventilation, imported French perfumes, multiple chemises to rotate. But even they lived in the same sooty cities. Even they wore tight corsets and heavy skirts. Even they sweated. Perfume did not remove odor, it blended with it. The result was not pure floral freshness, it was floral, layered over human warmth. A bouquet resting on damp wool. Hair was rarely washed, perhaps once a month. Natural oils accumulated. Pomades made from animal fat or oil added shine and structure. Powder might be dusted at the roots to absorb grease. By day's end, hair could carry a faint smell of oil, smoke, and perfume. When heated by the body, this scent deepened. Toothpaste was often chalk-based powder. Brushing happened, but not always daily. Onions, garlic, beer, and tea were staples. Cloves or mint leaves were chewed for freshness. Morning breath did not disappear, it simply blended into the background of Victorian life. It is important to understand something gentle and human here. They did not consider themselves horrific. They were accustomed to their environment, just as we are accustomed to ours. The baseline scent of society was stronger. Animals lived closer. Waste disposal was primitive. Laundry was labor. Fabrics were heavy. What shocks us would have been ordinary to them. In fact, A completely scentless person might have seemed unnatural. And so, as evening settles over our Victorian street, the air cools slightly. Coal smoke lingers. A woman unlaces her corset. She wipes her face with rose water. She changes into the cleanest chemise available. She empties the chamber pot. She opens the window, briefly, before closing it against the night air. She lies beneath heavy blankets, smelling faintly of lavender, wool, and the simple effort of survival. We will not close our eyes yet. There is much more to uncover. We continue gently. Morning has arrived in our Victorian household. The light is pale and filtered through coal haze. The air inside the bedroom is still, thick with last night's breath, wool blankets, and the faint sweetness of fading lavender. You wake not refreshed, but warm, slightly damp. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair. The sheets are linen. They were washed, perhaps last week, or perhaps last month. You sit up slowly. Your chemise clings lightly to your back. Beneath the blankets, layers have trapped the night's heat. There is no morning shower waiting, no rush of clean, chlorinated water. There is only the basin. On the small wooden stand sits a ceramic bowl and a matching pitcher. The water inside was poured the night before. It is now cold. You dip a cloth into it. First, the face. A quick wipe across the forehead, cheeks, chin. Then behind the ears, a detail Victorians considered important. The neck, the hands. If modesty allows and privacy exists, perhaps the underarms. This is called a strip wash. It is efficient. It is targeted. It is not luxurious. The water quickly turns gray. Dust, skin oils, and yesterday's residue swirl faintly in the bowl. That water will not be replaced until tomorrow. Perspiration was not new. Victorian bodies sweated as ours do, but their clothing magnified it. Underarms were rarely shaved. Hair retained moisture. Cotton chemises absorbed sweat, but they were not changed daily in most homes. A working-class woman might own only two. By midday, particularly in summer, a sour scent could develop, a mix of skin bacteria and trapped fabric. There were no modern antiperspirants. The first commercial deodorants would not appear until the late 19th and early 20th century. Instead, women used vinegar rinses, diluted alcohol, alum crystals, which mildly reduced bacteria, powdered starch or rice flour. These helped, briefly. Let us pause with the corset. Tightly laced, it compressed the torso. Breathing was shallow. Air circulation was minimal. Heat built beneath the bust and along the back. The chemise absorbed sweat between skin and corset, but pressure kept fabric pressed close. Friction increased warmth. The scent intensified. By afternoon, especially in crowded rooms, one might notice the warm, faintly acidic aroma of human skin beneath starch and silk. It was not always overwhelming, but it was present. Now we move carefully into a subject seldom spoken of openly. Victorian women managed menstruation with reusable cloth rags. These were folded and secured with pins or belts beneath the chemise and drawers. After use, they were washed by hand, often in cold water, sometimes discreetly at night. Hot water was reserved for cooking or special laundry. Cold washing did not always fully remove scent. Drying was done indoors or in hidden corners of the yard. If weather was damp, fabric could remain slightly musty. During this time of the month, extra rose water or sachets might be used. But without modern absorbent materials, odor management was imperfect. Again, this was not shameful by their standards. It was simply part of life. Let us look more closely at toileting. In middle and upper class homes, chamber pots were emptied into cesspits. In cities, night soil collectors removed waste periodically. Public sanitation was inconsistent. Before the major sewer reforms in London following the Great Stink of 1858, waste seeped into streets and rivers. After using the chamber pot, wiping was done with cloth scraps, paper, or old rags. These were sometimes washed and reused. Full washing after toileting was uncommon. A woman might include the area in her morning sponge wash, but not every time. Under multiple layers of clothing, with minimal airflow, residual scent could linger. Laundry day was an ordeal. Water had to be hauled, fires built, soap made from lye and animal fat grated into boiling tubs. Clothing was scrubbed against washboards. Hands reddened and cracked. Steam filled the kitchen. Undergarments were washed more frequently than outer dresses, but even then, perhaps once a week for the middle class, less often for the poor. Stockings, worn all day inside boots, could carry a sharp foot odor. They were washed when time allowed. Shoes were rarely aired thoroughly. Leather absorbed moisture. Powder was sometimes sprinkled inside to reduce smell, but summer heat always won. Hair washing was rare. Once every few weeks, sometimes once a month. Pomades made from bear grease, goose fat, or oil were used to smooth and style hair. These products themselves carried a faint animal scent. Over time, the mixture of oil, dust, coal smoke, and perfume created a distinctive smell. Not necessarily rotten, not necessarily unbearable, but warm, dense, lingering. In crowded parlors or omnibuses, when bodies pressed close, the combined scent of many unwashed scalps could thicken the air. Toothbrushing did occur, but powders were abrasive and unpleasant. Some skipped days. Victorian diets included onions, garlic, salted fish, and ale. Mouthwash was often diluted vinegar or spirits. Breath could be strong, especially in enclosed spaces. Lovers learned discretion. Conversations were angled slightly sideways rather than face to face. Handkerchiefs were essential. Imagine a dinner party in July. Windows closed to keep out foul street air. Candles burning. 20 guests layered in wool and silk. Roast meat, gravy, wine, hair oil, powder, warm skin. The air grows heavy. Fans flutter. Lace handkerchiefs rise discreetly to noses. Someone suggests opening a window. Fresh air enters, carrying horse manure and river stench. The window closes again. This was normal. Here is the most important understanding. Their baseline expectation of smell was different. Cities were filled with animals. Waste disposal was primitive. Coal smoke coated everything. Food preservation relied on salting and pickling. A mild human odor did not shock them. It blended. Only extreme neglect would draw comment, and even then, politeness prevented open criticism. Of course, there were times when smell became overwhelming. During heat waves, during illness, after childbirth when washing was minimal and rooms were closed tightly, in overcrowded tenements where entire families shared single rooms, in factories where sweat mixed with machine oil and dust. In those circumstances, scent could become sharp, almost suffocating. Vinegar cloths were waved, herbs burned, windows opened briefly, but solutions were temporary. In 1858, London experienced what became known as the Great Stink. The River Thames, filled with untreated sewage, emitted such an overpowering odor that Parliament itself was forced to act. Curtains were soaked in chloride of lime to mask the smell. The event eventually led to the construction of modern sewer systems. This moment marked the beginning of change. But for decades before and even after, daily life remained deeply scented. And so, evening comes again. A woman unpins her sachet. She removes her boots and releases a day's warmth into the air. She wipes her neck with rose water. She loosens her stays. The house smells of coal, cabbage, lavender, and people. She does not think herself horrific. She thinks herself ordinary. We continue when you are ready. We have lingered in the bedrooms, the streets, the parlors, and the omnibuses of Victorian England. We have breathed in coal smoke and rose water, wool and vinegar, lavender and life. Now we slow down even further, because the story of why Victorian women smelled so strong is also the story of why they eventually did not. The scent of the era was not the result of laziness. It was infrastructure. It was science still forming. It was water carried in buckets. It was fabric that trapped heat. It was cities growing faster than pipes and sewers could keep up. It was humanity living closely together for the first time in industrial history. The Industrial Revolution pulled families from countryside cottages into tightly packed urban neighborhoods. In rural areas, there was at least space. Fresh air moved more freely. Wells were closer. Laundry could dry outdoors without coal soot settling immediately upon it. But in cities like London, Manchester, and Birmingham, streets narrowed. Houses shared walls. Multiple families rented single buildings. Waste accumulated faster than it could be removed. Overcrowding intensified scent. Working-class women rose before dawn. They labored in factories, laundries, markets, and as domestic servants. Sweat was not optional. It was earned. After long shifts, returning home meant tending fires, cooking meals heavy in cabbage and onions, washing children, and preparing clothing for the next day. There was no energy left for indulgent bathing rituals. Let us gently revisit motherhood. After giving birth, Victorian women were often confined indoors for weeks in what was called lying in. Windows were kept closed to avoid drafts. Fires were kept burning. Sheets were changed as often as possible, but washing them required enormous effort. Blood, milk, sweat, and candle wax mingled. Midwives recommended light washing, but too much bathing was feared to weaken the mother. Without antiseptic knowledge widely practiced until later in the century, infection was common. An infection carries scent. It was not only daily life that produced odor, it was medical limitation. By the late 19th century, quiet revolutions began. Public health reformers pushed for cleaner streets and better sewer systems. The Great Stink forced London to build modern underground sewers. Clean water supplies expanded. Soap manufacturing became industrialized. Brands like Pear's soap marketed cleanliness as moral virtue. Advertisements began linking freshness with social success. The idea that one should smell neutral or even fragrant gained power. Indoor plumbing spread slowly from wealthy homes to the middle class. Bathrooms moved from kitchens to dedicated rooms. The bathtub, once an ordeal, became an aspiration.